I didn't believe the stories about people disappearing inside casinos until I worked the night shift at one of the oldest gambling halls on the outskirts of Las Vegas. The place didn't look special from the outside, just flickering neon lights and a parking lot that always felt emptier than it should. Inside, however, time behaved strangely. There were no windows, no clocks, and the air smelled permanently of cigarette smoke and old carpet, as if decades of desperation had soaked into the walls. Every night, without fail, there was one man who sat at the same blackjack table near the back corner. He wore the same gray suit, the same loosened tie, and had the same hollow look in his eyes. At first, I assumed he was a high roller with a routine, but weeks passed and nothing about him changed. He never spoke to anyone, never ordered drinks, and never stood up. Dealers rotated shifts, but he remained, always betting, always losing, always reaching for more chips. I asked one of the senior dealers about him, and the smile disappeared from her face immediately. She told me not to interact with that table unless I was assigned to it, and even then, to say as little as possible. When I asked why, she leaned closer and whispered that the man had been there longer than she had. She'd been working the casino for 12 years. One night, curiosity got the better of me. During a slow hour, I walked closer to the table pretending to clean the floor. Up close, something felt wrong. The man's skin looked pale and stretched tight, like it hadn't felt sunlight in years. His eyes barely blinked, and when he lost a hand, there was no reaction at all. No frustration, no anger, just acceptance. The dealer slid him more chips without him asking, and that was when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The chips didn't have denominations printed on them. Later that night, I checked the casino records. There was no player registered under his description. No loyalty card, no credit history, no surveillance footage of him entering the building. The cameras showed him sitting at the table at all hours, but there was never a frame where he arrived or left. It was as if the casino itself had simply grown him there. Around 3 a.m., the lights flickered briefly, something that almost never happened. When they stabilized, the dealer assigned to that table froze. The man's stack of chips was gone, replaced by a single black token marked with a symbol I didn't recognize. The dealer whispered something under her breath and pushed the token toward him. That was the first time I saw him smile. He finally stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoed unnaturally loud, silencing nearby machines. He picked up the token, looked around the room slowly, and for a moment, his eyes met mine. There was no anger there, no threat, just relief. Then he walked toward a door behind the table that I had never noticed before. It didn't appear on any floor map, and I swear it wasn't there earlier that night. The door closed behind him without a sound. The next morning, the table was gone. The carpet beneath it was newer than the rest of the floor, as if it had been replaced recently. When I asked about the man, no one remembered him. Not the dealers, not security, not even the surveillance supervisor. But that night, as I clocked out, I noticed a new blackjack table being rolled into the same corner. And sitting at it, already placing his first bet, was a different man. Younger, nervous, still wearing his coat. That's when I understood the truth. Some casinos don't just take your money, they take your time. And if you lose enough of it, you never get it back. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I didn't plan on gambling that night. I had just landed in the city for a construction contract, and the casino was the only place still awake after midnight. Neon lights reflected off the rain-soaked pavement, and the building looked less like entertainment and more like a fortress pretending to be fun. Inside, everything smelled expensive and artificial, like polished metal and recycled air. I played slots for a while, lost a little, won a little, and eventually wandered deeper into the building without realizing how far I'd gone. That's when I noticed the elevator. It wasn't on any map or signboard. It stood alone at the end of a quiet hallway, brushed steel doors slightly scratched, with a single button panel that listed floors far higher than the rest of the casino. Most stopped at level 12. This one went past 20, past 30. At the very bottom, written in faded red text instead of engraved metal, was a single option labeled floor. I assumed it was decorative, some kind of high roller joke, but before I could turn away, the elevator doors slid open on their own. Inside, a man already stood there. He was tall, thin, and dressed like a dealer, except his uniform was outdated, the kind you'd see in photos from the 1960s. His eyes never blinked. When I hesitated, he smiled slowly and said the floor never closes. I don't remember stepping inside, but suddenly the doors were closing and the elevator was moving far faster than it should have been. The floor numbers skipped erratically, lights flickering as if the building itself were struggling to keep up. When the doors opened, the sound hit me first. Coins clattering endlessly, dice rolling without stopping. A constant low murmur of voices whispering numbers, odds, names. The floor looked like a casino, but wrong. The ceiling was impossibly high, disappearing into darkness. The carpets were stained, not with spills, but with something darker. Every table was occupied. Every slot machine was being played. And no one looked happy. A woman at the roulette table laughed as the wheel spun, but her laughter never changed tone, never paused for breath. A man at the blackjack table kept saying, "hit," over and over, even as his hands shook violently. Dealers stood motionless between rounds, faces slack, eyes empty, waiting for the players to continue. I realized then that none of them ever stopped playing. There were no drinks being served, no breaks, no exits. I tried to leave. The elevator doors were still there, but the button panel was gone. A security guard approached me silently, his shoes making no sound on the carpet. He leaned in close and whispered that the floor only accepts players, not spectators. If I wanted to leave, I had to place a bet. The minimum wager, he said, was time. I laughed nervously, assuming it was part of the act, but his smile widened unnaturally, stretching too far across his face. I chose a slot machine near the wall. The screen flickered to life without asking for money. Instead, my reflection stared back at me, slightly delayed. Each spin made my head feel lighter, my thoughts slower. I noticed my hands trembling, my watch ticking louder with every pull of the lever. Around me, players looked older than they had moments before. Hair thinning, skin sagging, fingers stiff with arthritis. They weren't losing money. They were losing years. When I stopped playing, the machine buzzed angrily. The guard reappeared, reminding me that the floor never closes. You don't stop playing here. You only run out of something to lose. I felt panic rise in my chest as I realized the truth. Everyone on this floor had once been like me, tourists, workers, curious fools who wandered too far and stayed too long. I don't remember escaping. I woke up in my hotel room the next morning, drenched in sweat, my phone dead, my wallet untouched. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a nightmare. Then I noticed my reflection in the mirror. Deep lines under my eyes, gray hairs I didn't have before, and on my wrist, where my watch used to sit, a faint red mark in the shape of an infinity symbol. To this day, whenever I pass a casino late at night, I swear I hear coins clattering behind the walls, And sometimes, just for a second, I see an elevator door where none should exist, waiting patiently for another player, because that floor never closes. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I noticed the table before I noticed anything else about the casino, which should have been impossible because the place was enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling so high it vanished into shadow, and the sound of chips, laughter, and distant music echoed endlessly like the inside of a cathedral built for greed. But none of that held my attention. What caught me was a single blackjack table tucked far away from the main floor, unlit except for a soft amber glow, with no dealer standing behind it and no players seated around it. The felt was darker than the others, almost black, and etched into its surface was a name. My name. Not written crudely or scratched in, but embroidered perfectly, as if the table had been made specifically for me. At first I assumed it was some kind of coincidence or prank, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became that there was no mistake. Every letter was exact, down to the spacing and curve. I asked a nearby cocktail server about the table, trying to keep my voice steady, but she stiffened the moment I mentioned it. Her smile vanished, replaced by something close to fear, and she told me that table wasn't open tonight. When I pressed her, she leaned in and whispered that the table only appeared when the casino wanted something from you. Before I could ask what that meant, she hurried away, refusing to look back. I laughed it off, convincing myself it was just a themed attraction or psychological gimmick meant to unsettle high rollers. Casinos thrive on intimidation and illusion, after all. Still, when I turned back toward the table, I noticed something new. A single chair had been pulled out, angled slightly toward me as if inviting me to sit. The dealer appeared the moment I sat down. He didn't walk over or emerge from behind the table. 1 second, the chair across from me was empty, and the next he was there, hands folded neatly, eyes locked on mine. He looked ordinary enough at first glance, middle-aged, clean-shaven, wearing a standard black vest and white shirt, but there was something off about the way he moved. His motions were too smooth, too deliberate, as if he were following instructions only he could hear. Without asking for my name or checking any ID, he greeted me personally, thanking me for finally accepting the invitation. I tried to stand up then, suddenly overwhelmed with the urge to leave, but my legs wouldn't respond. The dealer smiled softly and told me the rules were simple. We would play until one of us won everything. The first few hands went strangely well for me. I won chips faster than I could stack them, each victory accompanied by the dealer calmly announcing personal details about my life. He mentioned my childhood home, my first job, arguments I'd had years ago that no one else should have known about. When I demanded to know how he knew these things, he calmly dealt the next hand and told me that the table remembers everyone who ever dreamed of more. As the pile of chips in front of me grew, I realized they weren't casino chips anymore. Some were engraved with dates, others with names, and a few bore words like sleep, memory, and time. When I lost a hand, one of them vanished from the stack, dissolving into dust the moment the dealer claimed it. Panic set in when I tried to leave again and found I still couldn't move. The dealer explained, almost apologetically, that walking away meant forfeiting the remainder of my stake, and by that point, I had already wagered far more than money. With every hand, my thoughts became slower, foggier, as if pieces of my mind were being quietly removed. I struggled to remember why I had come to the casino in the first place, or how long I had been sitting there. The dealer kept calling me by name, reminding me of things I didn't want to remember and things I was terrified of forgetting. He told me the table feeds on ambition, and the more you want, the more it takes in return. The game ended abruptly when I lost on a hand I was sure should have won. The dealer gathered the remaining chips, nodded politely, and thanked me for my contribution. The moment he stood up, my body unlocked, and the table went dark, my name fading from the felt as if it had never been there. I stumbled away, heart pounding, barely noticing the rest of the casino until I collapsed outside into the cold night air. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized something was wrong. I couldn't remember my sister's face. Her name was there, but her image was gone, like a photograph burned clean. Later, I discovered entire months missing from my memory, gaps I couldn't explain. Somewhere inside that casino, I knew, a table still existed that remembered me perfectly, even if I could no longer remember myself. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The casino floor was alive in the way only casinos ever are. Lights blinking in rhythmic patterns, the soft mechanical chime of slot machines, the low murmur of voices blending into a constant hum. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I noticed the blackjack table tucked away near the back, far from the main traffic. It wasn't marked any differently, but something about it felt wrong, like it existed just slightly out of place, as if the casino itself didn't fully acknowledge it. The dealer stood perfectly straight behind the table. He was tall, thin, and dressed in an old-fashioned black vest and white shirt that looked decades out of date. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were dark and unblinking. I remember thinking it was strange that he didn't seem to move at all, not even the small, unconscious shifts people make when standing for long periods. I sat down because the table was empty, and something about that felt inviting. The dealer slowly looked at me. I say slowly, but in truth, it felt more like his gaze slid onto me rather than moved. He said nothing. He didn't smile. He simply dealt the cards. The game started normally enough. I won the first hand, then the second. By the 5th win in a row, I realized something unsettling. The dealer hadn't blinked once. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but his face remained frozen, like a mannequin given just enough life to function. Other players began to join, drawn by the easy wins. A man in a gray suit, a woman with tired eyes, a younger guy who smelled of alcohol. We were all winning. The pile of chips in front of us kept growing, far faster than seemed reasonable. Then I noticed the first odd rule. Every time someone tried to speak, to joke, to comment, to ask a question, their voice caught in their throat. Words came out wrong, distorted, like they were being swallowed by the air itself. The dealer still said nothing. He only stared, unblinking, dealing hand after hand. After about 30 minutes, the man in the gray suit stood up abruptly. His face had gone pale. He said he needed to leave. The dealer finally moved in a way that wasn't part of the game. He tilted his head slightly and placed a single card face down in front of the man. The man froze. Slowly, as if fighting against something invisible, he sat back down. His hands trembled as the dealer flipped the card. It was a joker. The lights above the table flickered just for a second. When they stabilized, the man in the gray suit was gone. His chair was empty. His chips remained neatly stacked where he had left them, untouched. No one said a word. The woman across from me began to cry silently, tears rolling down her cheeks as she continued to play. The younger guy stared at the cards like they were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. And still, the dealer never blinked. I realized then that the wins weren't free. Every hand we won bound us tighter to the table. Every chip felt heavier than the last, like it carried weight far beyond money. When I finally lost a hand, relief flooded through me. I pushed my chair back, heart racing, and stood up. The dealer's eyes followed me. Slowly, deliberately, he placed one final card in front of my seat. I didn't look at it. I walked away, forcing myself not to run, not to turn back, not to acknowledge the sudden pressure behind my eyes, the overwhelming urge to return, to sit back down, to keep winning. The next morning, I searched the casino floor for that table. It wasn't there. Employees claimed no such dealer worked that shift. Surveillance footage showed nothing but an empty corner where I swore the table had been. But weeks later, I checked the news. A man in a gray suit had been reported missing after leaving the casino that same night. No body, no leads. Just one strange detail mentioned by the cleaning staff: a perfectly stacked pile of casino chips left behind at a table that no one remembered seeing. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. People who work in casinos know one rule better than any gambler ever will. If something seems too good to be true, it already belongs to the house. This story comes from a former night shift technician at a privately owned casino on the outskirts of Las Vegas, a place that never advertised jackpots on billboards and never appeared in tourism brochures. Locals called it the Quiet Strip Casino because winners there were strangely absent from the news. On a slow Tuesday morning at 2:17 a.m., a middle-aged man wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap sat alone at a progressive slot machine near the back wall. Surveillance later showed he had been playing the same machine for over 6 hours without moving. He never drank, never checked his phone, and never looked around. He only played. At exactly 2:19 a.m., the impossible happened. The machine rang with a sound no one on staff recognized. Not bells, not music. A low, sustained tone that caused nearby machines to shut off automatically. The screen displayed a number so large it didn't fit properly, glitching at the edges as if the system itself couldn't process what it was showing. A full progressive jackpot. Security froze. Floor managers stared at the screen. The technician watching the back-end system saw something even worse. The jackpot was never logged into the payout system. It existed on the screen, but not in the database. The man stood up slowly, smiling, and calmly asked the attendant to call a manager. His voice was steady, almost relieved, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Management escorted him into a private payout room. No cameras were allowed inside. That part was standard procedure. What wasn't standard was how long he stayed there. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. When staff finally opened the door, the room was empty. No blood, no signs of struggle, no broken furniture, just the chair pushed back neatly and a single slot voucher resting on the table. It wasn't a payout slip. It wasn't redeemable. It had no value code. Printed on it were only these words: "Jackpot accepted." The casino quietly shut down the machine. Officially, it was labeled a software malfunction. Unofficially, staff were instructed never to speak about that night again. The technician, however, couldn't stop checking the system logs. What he found weeks later made him quit. At 2:19 a.m. every night since the incident, the jackpot balance on that machine increases by exactly the same amount the man had wagered during his 6-hour session. No player interaction, no money entering the system. Just growth. As if the machine was still being played. Former staff swear that if you stand near that machine long enough during the early hours, you can hear a faint sound beneath the casino noise. Not coins, not music. A quiet voice whispering numbers. The casino never paid the jackpot, but something else did. And it's still collecting. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.